Hello friends, so in this video I will be explaining about call, apply and bind functions in JavaScript and fen2 and how to use them. So I will explain with very simple manner and let us just jump into that. So here you can see we have got two user objects, and what we want to do is we want to say, for example, print the details of user 1. So we will have to add one method on that one. So let us say print colon, and then here you can write function, and in here what you can do is you can say console.log user details. Okay, and here you can print that details of the user. Say for example, if you want to print name, so we can say print name method. Now let us call that method. So user1 dot print name, and let us go to the HTML page and then see what's the output here. So you can see it is printing the details like the name of that user. Now we have got another object as well, user2, and it also has the same property name, for example. And here the name is say Donald. Now user2, this object also wants to print its name. So what we will have to do is we will have to add print name method or similar method in this object as well, right? So we can do that print name, and this print name on the user2 object will be totally different from the print name method that we have created on user1. So here the duplication of the code is happening. So user1 and user2 objects both want to call one method. They are like exactly same, and still we are like duplicating the code. So to avoid that, call, apply, bind, these functions were created. So what we can do instead is that we can create a global kind of function. Okay, so here what I'll do, I'll take that function out of that user1 object, and what we will do now is that we will call this particular function on this user1 object, and that is where the call keyword comes into picture. So what we can do is say we want to call this method, right, print name. So we start with print name dot call. So every function has this method, so they come from the function prototype, and that's why on every function you will be able to use this methods call. The first argument is the object on which you want to call it, so user1. Okay, and the second argument is like any arguments you want to pass to this print name function. Remember that print name is a function, call is another function, right? So both these are like functions, so it is a bit complicated to understand, but you have to live with that because JavaScript, this is how the language is created. So this function we are calling using this call function, and there is a first argument that is user1, that is the object on which we want to call this particular method. And if you want to pass any arguments to that, you can pass it. Okay, say extra arguments you want to pass, say this user knows C, C++, so something like that. So like this you can pass these arguments. So what we just did is that we call this print name method or the function on this user1 object. Let us see if it works. So if you go here, and you can see it is still printing Sagar. And now what we can do is we can reuse this particular method for the other object or any other object. Say there are 100 objects, we can use the like same method or the function for those 100 objects as well. So here I'm gonna call that method on user2 object, and this person suppose knows Java and Python. So let us go back here, and then you can see here it will print the user details Sagar and user details Donald. So what we just did is that we reuse this particular function for both objects, right, thus removing the code duplication. And now these arguments, if you want to access them, you can just do it here, arguments like this. So arguments is the inbuilt object that is available in each function, and with the help of that you can access the arguments. So if you go here, it will print the arguments as well, C++, Java, Python for the other user. So that's it. That's how you can use this call method, right? Each function has this method. Now only difference between apply and call is that in call we pass these arguments using comma, like separately, but in case of apply we have to pass those arguments using array. That is the only difference. Otherwise everything else remains same. So I'm just gonna copy paste it here and just gonna call apply, and here instead of passing it in this separately we can use the array. Remember that you have to use the arrays. If you don't use the arrays you will get the error. So see here, you will get this error like this, which says create list from array like called on non-object. Okay, so this has to be an object. That is the only difference between call and apply. So now if you run it, you will not get that error. So you can see this time it worked, and it also printed these arguments as well for both the objects. Now finally we have got this bind function as well, or we can call it method as well, because we are calling this on this print name. Print name is a function, but again we can also call it as an object because everything is an object in JavaScript. Now what is the difference between bind and this call and apply? So main difference between these is that if you use this call function, what happens is that this print name will get called immediately. But if you use bind instead of this call, it basically returns the reference to the function that can be called later on. So for example, here we are going to store it in say f1 is equal to, and instead of call we are going to bind it. So what we are doing here is we are binding this user1 object with this print name function, and we are not calling it. So print name, this particular function, will not get called. Instead what will happen is that this bind is going to return another function reference. So f1 is basically a function which we can call later on. So for example, here we can call it, and if you go here now, it will print the user1. Okay, so it printed this user1 there, and if you don't call it, it will just do nothing. So it will just print 4 times these details, and then it will not print that this details here because we haven't called that function. So main difference between this bind and call and apply is that bind will just bind the function to object, that's it, and return the reference to the new function that has been created, and that we can call that function later on. But in call and apply, what happens is that that function, this print name, is getting called immediately. Okay, and another thing that I want to tell you is that use case of this bind. So if you have used the React, you must have seen like in class components, we bind the class methods with the object. Okay, this with this object. So that is how we can use this bind. So basically in web application, what happens is that user events can happen anytime. So once we bind it, then after the event happens, then that function can be called, and we don't need to worry about this binding this to the class methods. And that is one of the use case of the bind, but there can be multiple use cases like that. And one of the main significant difference between this, like the 5 we have got this call, apply, bind, is that we can reuse these functions, right? If you have one function, we can call that function on any number of objects. Basically, we are removing the duplication of the code. Say for example, on array prototype, we have got a lot of methods, right? So if you want to call any function on any other object, we can just call that one using this particular syntax. So the possibilities are unlimited. You have got a function, you can call it on any object on that function, basically. So the context of that function changes based upon what object we have used to call that function, and then this also changes. So here, when we call this particular function with user1, this refer to the user1, and when we call this print name function with user2, this refer to the user2. So that's how you can use this call, apply and bind in JavaScript. If you have more questions, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.